And you're incredibly lucky to have him all to yourselves. I had envisioned a lot of other people coming, so you guys are really fortunate. One of the things that'll make this really work, obviously, is when you guys have questions, to just feel free to raise your hand, fire away. I'll also be thinking about those values that you hold dear, or that you're maybe even just starting to really think about with this project, because I think it really questions a lot of our values, and to think about those. So, I mean, I don't know, you probably have a little time to hang around after class.
Sure.
So, if you guys have more questions, you don't feel comfortable asking the group, feel free to talk to them afterwards. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Keith.
Ed Sullivan.
First of all, do what he said, which is, if you have questions at any point, if I'm, not clear, if you think I'm full of baloney, whatever it is, please ask me for clarification, challenge me. I tend to be pretty emphatic about the things I'm talking about. That doesn't mean that I think that it's right necessarily, that I don't believe that, I have some strong opinions, but I know that there are lots of other strong opinions. And so I love to have a give and take on all this stuff. But let me just, in terms of values, let me just say something that I think is that is part of the reason that drives everything I do, and have been doing for the last more than 12 years now, painting these pictures. And that's a simple sort of overview of American history. And that is that, let's just go back to the signing of our Constitution. I mean, forget for a moment about the genocide of Native peoples and what that issue means in our history, and who we are, and kind of what that opens us up to in terms of values. But let's just begin with where our history is often talked about, beginning in 1787 with the signing of that amazing document, our Constitution. I'm sure you all know. Well, let me ask you, when we signed the Constitution, which said that it was establishing a country built on ideas of justice and equality and the rule of law, who actually got it? Who got those rights? Who got those benefits? Who got democracy?
Everyone in the U.S.
American citizens? Men. Men.
What?
Free
White men. Let's put those two together and then add another qualifier. Rich white men. Those are the only people who got the benefits of our Constitution. The only people. So we had this Constitution which said, talked about, this is our Declaration, unalienable rights, freedom, democracy, equality, law, the protection of law for everybody. The only people who got it were rich white men. So you see, right there at the beginning, there was this extraordinary divide between what we were saying as a country and what we were actually doing as a country. There's a simple word for when you have that big gulf between what you say and what you do. What's it called?
Hypocrisy.
Hypocrisy, absolutely. So, to me, it's almost like a religious moment where you define your credo, what you believe in. You put it out there. You say to the world, this is who we are, this is what I believe in, and then you only give it to a handful of people. This is, it's shocking in a way that we have traded for so many years on this glorious moment as though we actually fulfilled the promise. We didn't. So then how did it happen? What actually, what actually forced this country to live up to its own words? Was it those same rich white men who woke up one morning and said, oh my gosh, we forgot to give women the right to vote, we forgot to end slavery, we forgot to do something about civil rights, we forgot to stop child labor, we forgot, you know, what was it? What was it that actually started to spread the language, the promise of the Constitution to everyone?
They
What?
fought for their rights.
They fought for it. Right. People fought for it. The people who were marginalized, left out, excluded, disrespected, distrusted, actually had the courage and the persistence to fight. To me, when you start to examine American history, it's this kind of dual thing, this incredible language, and then the people with the courage to say, hey, wait a minute, you left me out. That should mean me too. That's the best part of our history. You know, it's not the wars we fought, it's not the famous generals, it's not the powerful industries. It's the insistence of the people of the country who believed in that language strongly enough to say it's got to be true for me if it's true for you, or you, it's true for me, or whatever the way you put that. That is extraordinary. Now these portraits, these are 6 of what's now over 200 portraits like this, covering all kinds of issues in an attempt to cover many of the issues that people had to show courage and fight for so that they would be included in that great journey that this country's been on. Yes?
Which of the people in the portraits have you interviewed in person?
I would say, it's interesting, there are now, as I said, over 200. I have interviewed, I don't know, 130 of them maybe. I mean,
Oh, wow.
there are a lot of them are dead.
Yeah.
So that was, although I did channel a few, and I got them right there. I have spent a lot of time with Frederick Douglass, let me tell you. But I almost feel like I've interviewed.
Yeah.
But like of these people here, the only one I didn't spend time with was Edward Snowden because they didn't go to Russia to meet him, and I probably wouldn't have been able to. But all the others, I go and meet them, I talk to them, and I spend as much as I can, I get involved in their issues.
Yeah.
And then, of course, obviously use the portraits to engage the issues. Yeah.
We've been talking a lot in class about like the government and wiretapping and stuff like that, and I know that some people that you interviewed are like that. But do you cover any other sort of topics upon interviewing people?
Oh, well, everything. I mean, a lot of the main pictures are about abolition, a lot of them about women's rights, a lot of them about gender rights, a lot of them about environmental issues, labor issues. I mean, I try to be as broad as possible to show that this country isn't just one issue. You know, it's a whole host of issues. But one of the points I was trying to make about this is that, you know, we are all encouraged all of the time, basically, whether it's 200 years ago or today, to accept the notion of the powerful, that they can be trusted to do what's right, that they care equally for all people, and that we only have to be patient, and our needs and our issues will be taken care of. If anything is taught by our history, that isn't true. Those people, often in positions of power, are not taking care of us. They're not interested in our issues. They're interested in protecting their power and their own wealth that power protects. And it is, in fact, up to us as citizens, when we see injustice and inequality, is to take on the battle for the struggle to make, to win that fight, because the powerful will resist you. Their status quo doesn't include your welfare necessarily. And whether we're talking about environmental issues, or just a second,
Yes.
environmental issues today, about climate change, or about these issues today, we're talking about surveillance, or, the gap between the rich and the poor today and what that does to any notion of democracy, about rule of law for all, about student debt. Some of you probably plan to go to college. I mean, you're about to enslave yourself to a debt system. Why is that? Who profits from that? Is that good for you? The government is not going to answer that question. It's up to us as citizens, to make this country, the right place for us to live in. So that's what a lot of this is about, and that's, has a lot to do with, there's some more very specific reasons that I have actually started painting these pictures, but we can talk about that. But I'd like to actually answer your question and then talk about who these people are right here and why I think they're important. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask, do you feel a certain sense of responsibility to the people of the U.S. and the world to make these people's stories known? Like,
that's what, I feel an enormous responsibility. First to myself, to be a better citizen and use my artwork to enable me to be the best citizen I can. I think through the artwork, it's given me a chance to talk with so many people all over this country and also in various places in the world about American history, about the responsibilities of citizenship. And I've taken that responsibility on myself, for myself. But also, I think what you're suggesting is, painting these portraits is entirely subjective. Nobody tells me, you need to paint so-and-so.
yeah.
I choose. And with that comes a lot of responsibility. I could be painting, frauds, charlatans, as far as, people who's, are trying to manipulate you in some way. It's my responsibility to paint people who I think have enormous integrity and are trying to do, the best thing for all of us. What I'm not painting are saints. Every one of these people is a human being with all kinds of flaws, who's done some good stuff and some bad stuff. But they've also shown enormous courage to confront something that's wrong. And I think in that is something that we all need to pay attention to, because there's a tendency for us to say, oh, well, these people did something because they're extraordinary people. Not true. That is not the case. They're not extraordinary people. They're ordinary people who showed some courage at a moment and then followed where that courage led. And that's the kind of person that I'm interested in, because that means that not only can they do it, but you can do it.
Yeah.
I can do it. You can do it. We can all stand up when we have to. And when you do, everything changes along the way. Are there any questions right now? Yes.
I want to know kind of what inspired you to do this, and what do you think your paintings, how do you think they have an impact on people, and why do you think it's important that you feel the need to do this and wanted to start this project?
Well, let me answer part of that, and I'm going to ask you, turn it around and ask you to answer another part of it.
Okay.
But I started it in September, October, November, December, January, 4 months after 9/11. And the reason I did was not because of 9/11, but because that immediately after 9/11, the U.S. government was trying to persuade all of us that we needed to attack a country called Iraq. They had nothing to do with 9/11, claiming that they had weapons of mass destruction, that they were involved in, suggesting that they were involved in the attacks on the Twin Towers, that they had Al-Qaeda operating in there, and they were dangerous to the future of this country. Well, guess what? Those were all lies. Every one of them was a lie. And if we had a really sufficiently free press in this country, independent media operating at the time, we all would have known that. It was easy enough to find out if you want to spend a little time investigating yourself, but certainly not every person in this country has time to investigate everything the government says. That's why you have a free press, right? Anyway, they were lying. And I was furious. Not because I don't like people lying to me, which I don't enjoy, but I knew that I mean, this was a lie about starting a war. There were going to be thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of victims of the war. It was going to cost, it's turned out now, trillions of dollars that could have been spent on education, healthcare, infrastructure, the environment. It's all gone. A lot of it's going to be, is a loan from China. We'll be paying it back for all of our lifetimes and many other lifetimes. To do what? What did we gain? Besides the fact that this was a huge crime. Our own government was lying to us. They were breaking all of our laws. I was furious when I saw this happen. I'd seen it happen before. And I was thinking, what can I do at this moment as a citizen of this country? How can I have a voice about this? And I thought, well, probably my best voice is through the thing I do best, which is paint. And so, but how can I use it? And I had a kind of problem for months trying to figure out what to do, because I knew that if I used the feelings I had, the immediate feelings, anger, cynicism, shame, when we were doing these things, if I used those feelings and put those out there, nobody wants to look at that. I mean, it would be like ranting. I mean, how many people want to hear me rant? Nobody. It's like, okay, shut up, go away, I don't want to hear it. I thought, I've got to use all that energy from the anger. By the way, sometimes when people realize you're angry about something else, they'll tell you, why don't you see a therapist? You need to get over your anger. Anger about injustice is the appropriate response. It's one of the people I painted, a great environmentalist named Terry Tempest Williams, calls it sacred rage. Sacred rage, when you're really angry about something that's a great injustice. So I was feeling that, but I also knew that, how I presented that was key to this project. And I thought, well, I've got to take that energy and use it not in the service of anger, but in the service of, for lack of a better word, love. Use it in the service of love. And I thought, how to do that? Well, I was spending a lot of time ranting to myself and to other people around me about figures in our government who were promoting this war illegally and immorally. Why don't I instead of letting them have so much hold over my life and my imagination, why don't I start surrounding myself with people I admire that make me feel good about the country? So I painted a portrait of Frederick Douglass. I painted a portrait of Susan B. Anthony. I painted one of Jane Addams and Mother Jones and Sojourner Truth. And then gradually I painted all these 19th century figures, and then started into 20th century figures. I painted Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, W.B. Du Bois, and just on and on and on. And I was astounded, both what it was making me feel, which was good, instead of angry. Just had a huge admiration for the people I was painting and what they'd given to all of us. And also what I was learning so much about our history. What would happen was I painted a portrait of Cesar Chavez. Who was Cesar Chavez? Anybody? No, that's a different Chavez. Hugo Chavez, the president of Venezuela. Cesar Chavez was started the United Farm Workers Movement to get decent working conditions and labor pay for farm workers, who are mostly migrants, from Central America, Mexico. A huge movement. He operated exactly the same method as Martin Luther King. It's nonviolent, but it's very militant in terms of protest. I knew something about Cesar Chavez, and to paint him was obvious for me because how he made people live up to decent care for working people, especially immigrants. And I started getting letters from some people in San Antonio, Texas, saying, Cesar Chavez, that's great. Why haven't you painted Emma Tenayuki? How many of you have ever heard of Emma Teddy? I had never heard of her. Well, it turns out that in the 1930s, a teenage girl, this is 1930s, that means the Depression, when there were very few jobs at all. A teenage Tejano, is a part Indian, part Mexican Texan, a woman, teenager, Emma Teddy, was leading labor movements, like strikes, for poor workers, and winning these strikes. They said, Cesar Chavez, yeah, he's great, but how about Emma Teddy? So I got in touch with her relatives, I got in touch with her biographer, I painted a portrait of Emma Teddy. Anyway, it's been that kind of, I've been learning that kind of history, that these people are out there who are doing extraordinary, courageous work that have been basically forgotten in our history. And so one of the major points of this for me is to bring back the stories of people, not just for their sake, but as role models. You know, how do we deal with the big issues today? Do we have to invent the wheel each time? Or do we look and say, oh, wait a minute, we've got a labor issue here. Let's look at what Emma Teniuka did, how she won. How did she appeal? How did she make a mass movement? How could she, during this incredible, difficult time when there was no money to go around anywhere, win a labor dispute? Pretty interesting. And so that kind of thing is fascinating. Because my project is about now something I call narrative activism. That is, giving us all stories to tell ourselves that we didn't have before, that could actually help us a lot. Well, here, let me give you another example. Somebody tell me who Rosa Parks was. Rosa Parks.
She was on the bus.
Somebody must know.
Dee Dee knows she's better than Linda.
She like refused to move on the bus because she was in the middle section, which is where both white and colored people were allowed to sit. And so, like, when she refused to move, she was kicked off the bus and started a strike or a boycott of the entire like bus line.
Yeah, this happened in December 1st, 1955. A black woman in Montgomery, Alabama, who was in basically the black section of the bus, or the one of the other section of the bus. The front section, the white section, filled up. The bus driver pointed at her and the people in her row and said, "You all go and stand in the back." Who knows what he actually called them? And everybody around her did. They all got up and moved their back. She didn't. He yelled at her. I mean, think a moment. Let's go back. It's 1955. You're in Montgomery, Alabama, one of the most racist and violent places in the United States. You're on a bus. The front is all now full of white people. You've been ordered to go to the back. Other people have moved, and you refuse. What do you think it was like being on the bus? What was going on? I mean, we often tell this story, but what was it like to be there? What were the white people doing? Imagine. I mean, just take a guess. What do you think? Were they quiet?
They're really annoying.
They're probably yelling at her. Think what they were calling her. Think what they're calling her. Think how dangerous that could have been. I mean, people were getting killed for a lot less than what she was doing, for standing up against white racism. She could have been killed right there on that bus. It was a huge thing. Think what the black people in the back must have been thinking. Did they want her to stay in that seat? My guess is no. They were thinking, Rosa, get up and move before something horrible happens here. One of the I stand up now, sorry. One of the great moments in American history happened next. You know, the bus driver ordered her to move. And then he said, you know, nobody had cell phones then, so he had to stop the bus and get off and call the cops. So these two cops with guns and everything come on, and they stand over her. you know, and they say, you know, either you move or you're getting arrested right now. And you know what she said? She said, I give you my permission to arrest me. Could you imagine saying that to a cop? I mean, especially a black woman in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955. I give you permission? Incredible. She was saying, I'm in charge of this moment, not you. I'm in charge. And I want to go to jail. Not because I want to be in jail, because I want to go to a judge and say the problem is not that I'm a bad person breaking a good law, but I'm a good person breaking a bad law, and it's up to you to change the law. This is what's called civil disobedience. You know, you break the law on purpose, you don't run away, and you say, it's the law that's bad, not me. Almost every big issue in this country, and this is what a lot of this is about, are about bad laws, or about good laws not being enforced. And so that moment was a defining moment because of her, the bus boycott was organized by a 26-year-old minister named Martin Luther King. That's where he got his start. He was asked, and he was reluctant. He said, I don't want to do this. And then he realized that somebody had to do it, and it might as well be him. Martin Luther King organized that boycott and led. His house was bombed, you know, while he did this. There was little kids, you know. The stakes were really high. But the story I want to tell you, there's another story behind this, as there is with almost all this stuff. There's always another story. 9 months before Rosa Parks, a 15-year-old girl named Claudette Colvin had refused to move on a bus. Another black girl had, you know, Rosa Parks was trained. She'd gone to a school in Tennessee called the Highlander School, where they trained people to do things like this. I mean, she didn't know that she was going to do it that day or anything else, but she was prepared. She was a secretary of the NAACP, the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People. She'd been trained in civil disobedience protest, nonviolent protest. She knew something about what she was doing. This girl, Claudette Colvin, had never been trained in anything. She was just a kid who just realized the injustice of what was being done to her when she was told to move on a bus 9 months earlier. She refused. Same thing happened. The cops came on. They dragged her off the bus, literally dragged her. And she was shouting the whole time, the Constitution allows me to sit here. By the way, the case that went to the Supreme Court, which changed the laws about desegregation in this country, segregated buses, was not Rosa Parks' case. It was Claudette Colvin's case, a 15-year-old kid. She was the one who changed the law. Isn't that interesting? Why don't we know this stuff? I didn't know.
Well, I don't know if you know, but why would Rosa Parks get all of the credit for it?
Because when Claudette Colvin did this, the community wasn't ready. She was actually ostracized by her own black community. They were scared of her. This 15-year-old kid had started something that might have caused enormous violence. They were afraid of their houses being bombed, of race riots. They were terrified of what she had done. They weren't ready. They hadn't been prepared. And they also thought that there were some people who knew that they wanted to confront this issue, but they wanted somebody they chose to be the spokesperson, the front person. Claudette Colvin was a wild card. They weren't ready, and they decided not to. But when lawyers wanted to take the case, Rosa Parks didn't want her name on the case, and Claudette Colvin said she would like the case to be heard. So the case went to the Supreme Court with Claudette Colvin's name. I mean, it's wonderful. But here's what I want to tell you about it, and this has to do with this is probably the longest time ever somebody's gone to answer a question.
It's okay.
Think about yourself being Claudette Colvin for a second. And you're on that bus, and you're ordered to move, and you're in a very violent place, and you have no idea. You have no control over what might happen. The story you're telling yourself in your head at that moment is, as you decide what to do, is, sort of like, well, I'm guessing that the first voice that Claudette Colvin was listening to was her parents saying, Claudette, move. This is not worth your life at this moment. I don't care what you think you're doing. This is very dangerous. Go up, get to the back of the bus. We'll talk about it later. Right? I mean, if you were in a situation, you're thinking, well, what advice would my parents give me at this moment? Probably be, get out of the way. She was asked later why she didn't move, why she didn't listen to that voice. And she said, I tried to. I tried to get up and move. But she said, the school, this is days of separate but equal schools. They were not integrated. She went to an all-black high school in the government. And they had been teaching black history. And they had been covering all these different figures. And she said, I tried to move, but history glued me to my seat. And somebody said, well, what do you mean by that? She said, well, I tried to get up. And as soon as I tried to move, I felt Harriet Tubman's hand on my shoulder, saying, sit back down. Who was Harriet Tubman? Yeah, conductor on the Underground Railroad. An amazingly courageous black woman who escaped from slavery and then went back and back and back at great danger to herself, to bring other slaves out. She said, I felt Harriet Tubman's hand on my shoulder pushing me back down. Then she said, I tried to get up again and I felt Sojourner Truth's hand on my other shoulder pushing me back down. She was another great abolitionist who spent the majority of her life fighting for end slavery and also to rights for women. And so she said, I asked them, I said, Harriet, Sojourner, what do you want me to do right now? And they said, stay right there. She said, what choice did I have? I had to stay there. That's why these stories are so important, is in a moment of where we're really challenged by an issue. What story do we listen to? Do we have a historical presence of somebody who says to us, this is important for you to show courage at this moment because you can actually change something by your courage. That's what I hope that people take away a little bit from these portraits, is a story that gives them permission to act when they have to. Because that's so much about what it is about all of us, each one of us, giving ourselves permission to act when something is tough. Now, the other part of the question, yeah. How much time do we have? I haven't talked about any of this stuff.
Then we have about a half an hour.
Okay. So let's, I'm sorry I get lost in these things because it's all so interesting to me. Any other particular questions, or I'll tell you some about these people. Yeah.
So I think it's safe to say that you do this to raise awareness of these people and inform everyone about their stories. So how many people would you say that you've touched, that you told these people's stories to, like, to put it conceivably, how famous do you think you are? Like, how many people? I mean, like, how many people are you?
Well, it's not a, for me, it's not a question about fame, but it is a question about getting the stories out. I have no idea. I mean, I am on the road all over this country talking all the time. So it's a lot of people, but even more than that is the Americans Who Tell Truth website. The website that has all the portraits, biographies, lesson plans, history, blogs. It's got a lot of information. And, 500,000 people a year from all over the world use that site. It's a lot. But I don't know. I mean, whether it makes any difference, I don't know. But it makes me feel like I'm engaged, which is important. Let's talk a little bit about these particular people and maybe some surveillance issues. And it's important to know, let me just introduce you, if that's okay, to who these folks are. John Kiriakou. Anybody idea who he is?
CIA agent.
CIA agent, former.
Yes.
What was his issue?
Torture.
Torture. And what did he do about it?
He exposed it.
You know, when it was first came up as a international issue that the United States was using torture in several different places. I mean, first it came up in the prison in Iraq, outside of Baghdad, Abu Ghraib, that prisoners there were being tortured by U.S. personnel, soldiers, agents, etc. And it caused a huge scandal. And then it was discovered that that wasn't an isolated case, that torture was going on at Guantanamo, torture was being used at Bagram in Afghanistan, that there was something called extraordinary rendition going on, which was people who were suspected of being terrorists were being actually kidnapped from cities around the world, flown on secret CIA planes to what they call black sites, a lot of which we don't even know about today, where they were, who operated them, and these people were being tortured. It's illegal. Torture is illegal for very good reasons. But when the stories came out, one of the first things that was said was, oh, you know, this can be blamed on a few bad soldiers or a few bad agents who get out of control and they do these things and, you know, we disapprove of it. There's a lot more to this story, but anyway, John Kiriakou on a national television program in 2007, and he's a CIA agent, was asked about waterboarding, which is a form of torture, which our government was describing as an enhanced interrogation technique. They don't like using the word torture, so they give it this euphemism. So he was asked about that, and he said, you know, there's a lot of controversy today about whether this is torture or not. What do you think? And he said, it's torture. And then they said to him, well, what about, where does the legality for these things come from? You know, is it just a few bad people? He said, no. It actually, it's the policy of the government, and it starts with the president. Whoa. I mean, he actually thought, like a lot of people who are called whistleblowers, that it's important for all of us as citizens of the country to know what's being done in our name. I mean, if somebody's being tortured and because you're an American, you're somewhat responsible, you probably ought to know about it, right? Or at least you ought to know what the excuse is to make it legal. And so he said that, in fact, it is happening, and it's actually the policy of the people at the top. There's a lot of stuff that happened in here, but basically he got charged with the Espionage Act. That means for telling the truth about what was going on around the issues of torture. He was classified as a spy, a traitor to the country, and was going to spend maybe 35 years in jail. He is in prison right now. This man, the CIA agent who told the truth about torture, is in prison. Let's make something clear. The people who designed the policy, most of the people who carried it out, people who may be still carrying out stuff, none of those people is in jail. The only person that this country has put in jail around torture is a guy who tried to stop it.
Make it difficult for you to want to say anything about it again.
That's exactly why they do that.
Yeah.
Exactly why. To intimidate people. To say, oh, wow, look what happened to this great guy, John Kiriakou, who had the, you might say courage, you might say stupidity, to stand up against the power of the CIA and his own government around this issue. And look what happened to him. He plea bargained. He's got 5 kids. He'd lost everything trying to defend him. He plea bargained. They finally put him in jail for 36 months. He's still in prison. He'll be out about a year from now. I spent a lot of time with this guy. He's a wonderful, honest, brave person who's paid a big price. Yeah.
When did he announce this? 2002, you said?
No, it was 2007 when he first started talking about it. And the interesting thing was, he thought that people in the government and the CIA would kind of welcome what he was doing because he was telling the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, he had no idea what was going to happen. This woman, Jane Mayer, is a. Well, let me just read this. I mean, the quotes are so important. You know, I picked these quotes to have impact. You know, so that people really pay attention. I mean, these are big issues. He says, even if torture works, which it doesn't, by the way, but he says, even if torture works, it cannot be tolerated. Not in one case or 1,000 or 1,000,000. If their efficacy becomes the measure of abhorrent acts, all sorts of unspeakable crimes somehow become acceptable. That's a big mouthful there. But what he's saying is, if you decide that doing something awful to people gets what you want, and if that's the only way you measure what you're doing, you know, that's a terrible thing. Because then you'll do anything. I mean, if I torture you and I get your information, that I think I get the information I want, well, why not do anything to anybody then? Anytime. And I get away with it. You know, if only the fact that something works is the only measure you put on your actions, you know, you're in big trouble. I mean, it means you have no ethics, no morality, no nothing. You know, the only thing that's important is whether it works or not. So then he says, I may have found myself on the wrong side of the government on torture, but I'm on the right side of history. There are things we should not do, even in the name of national security. One of them, I now firmly believe, is torture. He didn't believe that all the time. He was sort of in this middle ground for a while. And, you know, he was in this culture where they said, hey, you're in the CIA, it's secret, you can do anything you want. And he believed that for a while until he began to think about what it really was. This is a journalist, and I'll get back to her in a second. And these three are very much related. This woman, Jesla Radick, was a young lawyer out of Yale who was at the top of her class at Yale, and she got this dream job, hired into the ethics department in the ethics division of the Justice Department in the United States right before 9/11. And you know, the next thing that happened that was in September and October. We went to war against Afghanistan. The first person caught in that war as a enemy combatant, as they called them, was an American. In Afghanistan was an American named John Walker Lynn, who was a 19-year-old kid who'd gone to Afghanistan a couple of years before to study Sharia law with the Taliban. He was not part of the war. He was just there and got run over by the war. He was not fighting against Americans. But he was called an enemy combatant, and a whole lot was made about the fact that this was an American. What a traitor, fighting against American soldiers, defending the people who took down the Twin Towers. Not the case. He was tortured by FBI agents, shot in the leg, I mean, and then not told that he had a lawyer when in fact he had a lawyer. This case is really worth looking into if you're at all interested in this. She was in the ethics department at the Justice Department and said, whoa, you know, if you're going to do these things to this guy, you can't bring it to court because you've trashed all of his legal protections, and you told him he had no lawyer when in fact he had a lawyer. You know, that's illegal. And she said, nothing you've done will hold up in court. You've got to stop this behavior. So what did the Justice Department do? They fired her. They didn't want to hear this. So they fired her. She then went to work as a lawyer for something called the Government Accountability Project, which is a watchdog agency. It's not run by the government. It's run to watch the government and try to keep the government honest. She became aware of this man, Thomas Drake, who 7 years before Edward Snowden, who you probably heard of, the guy in the end there, was also at the NSA and blew the whistle on the same things: corruption and illegal surveillance, mass surveillance in the NSA, which he knew was illegal. He did what Edward Snowden didn't do. He did what's called go through channels. You know, he went to his boss, He went to his boss's boss. He went to a congressional committee. He said, I see enormous financial corruption. I see the breaking of all of our laws about surveillance, you know, and the Fourth Amendment, all happening right here in the NSA. This should stop. He's a whistleblower. He's telling the truth. What happened to him? Just like John Kiriakou, he was charged with the Espionage Act, as though telling the truth about the corruption and spying going on in the NSA, illegal spying. He was a traitor. He's not in jail. How did he avoid jail? This woman, who was his lawyer, realized that most people in this country had no idea what was going on and what was happening to him and why. So she got in touch with this woman, Jane Mayer, who's an investigative reporter at the New Yorker magazine, and told her about Tom Drake's case. She also got in touch with 60 Minutes. And within a period of about a week, her long article in the New Yorker, which you can actually find if you go online and look for it, Jane Mayer and Thomas Drake, and 60 Minutes did long segments on him. It exposed how the government was treating this guy who was trying to tell the truth about what's going on. The government dropped the case. By that time, he had already lost his home, all of his life savings. He was $500,000 in debt trying to defend himself, and his marriage fell apart. And now he works at an Apple store in Virginia when he isn't out talking about what happened. You can go online and see a lot of videos of him discussing what these issues are and all that stuff. Anyway, this is one of those great examples of what the power that the press has when it actually is willing to stand up to the government or any power, corporations, whatever, and get the real truth out about an issue. It can actually make very powerful institutions back down when they're faced with the truth about a situation. As long as they can keep it secret and make sure that nobody reports on it, they can do all kinds of things. But when they're faced with a lot of people knowing, it changes the game. So, actually, I hope we read these things. I'm not going to take the time right now to read them, but because they're so important about. Well, let me say one other thing, and maybe I'll just read a bit of Tom Drake's here. This last sentence says, "This is not, the way he's being treated." He says, "This is not the America I took an oath to support and defend in my career." He'd been in the military, in 2 branches of the military before he went into intelligence work. "This is not the America I learned about while growing up in Texas and Vermont. This is not the America we are supposed to be." This is a very patriotic guy who thought he was acting in the interests of the Constitution and the American people, who's then being charged as a spy. This is one of the things that, in our press, we are all encouraged to be suspicious of people like Ed Snowden, Tom Drake, Jesselyn Radack, John Kiriakou, as somehow they're anti-American. Whereas the emotion and the idea which drives them is actually idealist about the values of the country. They believe intensely in the values of the Constitution and what it means to be in a free country. That's why they do these things. That's why they take these risks. Yeah.
The dual, just speak to the dual commitment.
Yeah, well, we talked about this earlier. You join an agency like the NSA or the Defense Department, or, wherever, a corporation, and they make you sign a pledge that says, you're going to be receiving lots of classified material. It's your obligation to keep it secret, period. You don't tell anybody what you know. But they've taken another oath, too. In any of these things, whether you join the Army or the Navy or the NSA or the Justice Department, the President, everybody signs an oath to the Constitution, right? To defend the Constitution. I mean, when you go to war as a soldier for the United States, the reason you're going to war is theoretically to defend the Constitution. So what happens often, I mean, it's
They contradict each other.
it's great when the things are in line. You know, that keeping a secret also seems to be good for the Constitution. But when you get in a situation where you've been told to keep a lie that actually is bad for the Constitution, bad for the country, what do you do? Which one of those oaths do you actually pay attention to? And it becomes a huge problem for people. You know, do I expose my boss? Do I expose my company? Do I tell the truth about some corruption going on here when I promised that I wouldn't talk about it? Or do I obey my oath to the Constitution? If I do what the Constitution wants me to do, I've got to come out and tell the truth. It's a very tough choice, especially when all the other things are loaded onto it. Let me quickly tell you a story. I painted a portrait of a woman named Anne Wright, who was a diplomat. She was one of 3 diplomats, U.S. diplomats, who resigned the day the Iraq War started. She said, I can no longer work for this country. This war is so bad and so atrocious and been so many lives. I can't defend the United States anymore. I can't be a diplomat. She quit. She said she got immediately besieged by other U.S. diplomats all over the world who said, Anne, it's so great what you've done. I'm really behind you. I agree with you, but I couldn't possibly do what you're doing. I've got a mortgage to pay. I've got kids in college. You know, I've got my career ahead of me. What if I did what you did? I'd be out on the street. Who's to say? They're all right. I mean, there's often an enormous problem with telling the truth and doing that kind of, making that kind of choice. Look what Snowden has lost. Everything. I mean, in a sense, he's lost everything. I mean, he's been exiled from this country. He comes back here, he might be tried as a traitor. What does he have? Tell me, what does he have today that he didn't have before? Maybe.
Awareness, I guess. People know his story.
That's one thing.
Support.
What?
Support.
So he's got a lot of support.
The personal knowledge that he told the truth and he's supposed to do.
Absolutely. He's got his self-respect. You know who Muhammad Ali is, right? He, stood up for this country, refused to fight in the Vietnam War. His title was taken away from him. He lost millions of dollars. Couldn't fight for 5 years, because he refused to fight in the Vietnam War. But what did he have? He was asked, well, what do you have now? He said, I've got my self-respect. And that's the thing. I mean, and also the people who wrote about him now have a Pulitzer Prize for having made us all aware of these issues. This is Daniel Ellsberg, speaking of the Vietnam War, who, smuggled the Pentagon Papers out of the Pentagon to tell the truth about the Vietnam War, both the lies that were behind it and also the lies that were continuing to be told about how it was being fought and lost, and which were being hidden from the American people. All of this, let me just say something. Almost all of this rests on this quote from Snowden. He says the public needs to know the kinds of things the government does in its name, or the consent of the governed is meaningless. The consent of the governed is not consent if it is not informed. If you go out and vote for somebody and you don't know what they really stand for, what have you voted for? You've got to know what's behind something. Otherwise, the idea of democracy becomes a kind of sham. We've got to know these things. We're responsible. Our money is paying for this stuff. It's buying the weapons, it's buying the cluster bombs that are dropped on children. We've got to know these things. And if we don't know it, what have we got? What kind of government have we got? These are huge questions that each one of us has to think about because, we have the power as people always to shape our own future. a lot of times you think, well, there's the government, the military, and all the trappings of all that intense financial wealth. They have enormous power, and they do. They have enormous power. The only thing that actually balances that out is us. Is our refusal or acceptance of going along or not. Yeah.
John had a question for you.
Oh, good.
Well, it's a two-part question, okay? The first part is,
Should only take me about 2 hours to answer.
well, how were you able, because he's a fugitive, how are you able to interview Snowden, number one? And number two, because of this work and what you were just talking about, do you think that the NSA has a file on you? And
That's a good question.
Well,
does
the
that affect
scarier
you?
thing is that, I talk about a lot of this stuff very openly. I would be surprised if they didn't have a file on me. But the scarier thing is they've got a file on you. Seriously, what have you done? They've got a file on you, and they've got a file on you.
I know
It has a very chilling effect on all of us to think that somebody is watching and listening, potentially, and keeping all kinds of information on every one of us. That kind of feeling makes all of us want to kind of toe the line. They say, well, if you haven't done anything wrong, you've got nothing to fear. Well, that's interesting. What do they mean by nothing wrong? Standing up against them? But anyway, I didn't interview Snowden himself. I interviewed people who know Snowden. I mean, like Tom Drake and Jesselyn Radek have gotten to be friends of mine. They both went to Russia and visited him and actually gave him the Sam Adams Award for citizenship and bravery. So I've spent a lot of time with them, talking to them, and then I just read all the stuff that's on the internet about, and the press reports from Glenn Greenwald about his interviews with him. By the way, Glenn Greenwald, who won the Pulitzer for his reporting on Snowden, he just published a book yesterday about Snowden, and I heard him talking about it. It sounds fascinating.
And I published an article, the article you gave me, by him,
Oh,
on our Google community, the Greenwald one.
yeah,
I
I
know
hope
that you
sometime
said
to.
this, I want.
What I do know is that when Jesselyn and Tom went to Russia to visit Snowden, they took a poster of my painting of him and gave it to him.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, cool.
So that was. I haven't heard back what he thought of it.
I was going to ask, after you hear about these whistleblowers, do you do your own research and make your own conclusions before believing wholeheartedly these people's stories?
Oh, absolutely. I do as much as I can. I mean, actually, I get besieged with recommendations of people to paint.
Yeah.
And also sometimes for some reason, especially around this kind of issue, whistleblowing, I get emails from people who say, I'm a whistleblower, this is what I did, and they send me all this stuff, and why don't you paint my portrait?
Yeah.
I'm really suspicious of that when that happens, because I don't know who these people are. And whenever that happens, though, what I do is I go to people I trust, like Jesselyn, at the Government Accountability Project, and I say, who is this person? Is this for real? And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's an issue. I mean, there are hundreds of whistleblowers. I'm only going to paint a handful of them. So I'm careful about who they are and what the issues are.
Yeah.
I mean, the next person I'm going to paint, actually, who I'll be meeting in a couple of weeks in Washington, is another whistleblower, a guy named John Oberg, who blew the whistle on the corruption in the student loan financing business, which is a huge issue. Oh, it's a huge issue. I mean, it's amazing. Look, this guy is John, Jon, Oberg, O-B-E-R-G. Look him up if you're interested in going to college and getting a loan and understand how this all works and who profits from it. This guy's worth reading because he exposed all these terrible financial shenanigans behind this whole industry.
Maria had a question.
Oh, what's your process of painting?
Like, how do you go about,
Yeah,
like,
that's gonna be my question.
you know, like, how long does it take you to do one thing?
I can usually do the painting in about a week.
Oh, that's so cool.
I
Wow.
spend a lot more time researching than I do painting it.
Mhm.
But I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, if we have time, I could talk about the actual physical process, but it usually takes about a week.
Mm.
Yeah.
I just have a quick follow-up. It looks like you put an incredible amount of work. I mean, a week is still a incredible amount of time to me. I don't think I'm that devoted to anything. But do you carve the words into these?
Yeah, they're scratched in. I use a dental tool. These are painted on wood. And I paint on wood so I can do things like that. And they have us, there's a primer underneath called gesso, which is very thick. It's white, and it seals it so you can paint on it. And then when it's all dry, I use this dental tool to carve the words into it, and I frequently misspell. This is a problem. Oh man, I've ruined. Well, I mean, I've had to repaint.
Oh, it's so nerve-wracking.
I mean, I get so intent on each letter that I leave letters out, I leave words out. It's embarrassing. Yeah.
I just had a very quick follow-up on the follow-ups. When you paint the people that you do interview, do you just like snap a picture of them and then paint it later, or do you kind of have them sit and then you paint them?
Well, they sit, and I talk to them about what I'm looking for, and then I also take. I mean, I don't paint while I'm having them sit.
Okay.
I take pictures and interview them. They don't have time.
Yeah.
It actually takes a lot longer to have somebody sit and paint from them than it does to have a photograph or photographs, and I'll take 25, 30 pictures and then look for certain things to paint. But, you know, it would take 3 weeks to paint at least if I had them sit. And, I mean, that would be a nicer way to do it, but
Yeah.
it's not going to happen. So this is the only way I can do this.
Denise, you have a question?
Yeah, just to backtrack a little bit, what do you believe the government's role is to keep us safe?
Well, that's, I mean, good question. I mean, certainly one of the primary obligations of a government, probably the only justification for government, is to care for its citizens, right? And, you know, how do you define that? What is, I mean, why else would you have a government except to somehow make your lives better than they would be if you had no government, right? I mean, to give you maybe better health care, better education, physical protection, more freedom. I mean, there are always going to be trade-offs, there are going to be compromises. I mean, a lot of people think that no government, which is true, you're completely free. So if we believe in freedom, no government. Well, no, that makes it actually not so good if you have no government. So what to begin to think of is the real obligation of government. And then what is actually necessary for government to do, what do you have to give up in order to get the things that you think you want from your government. This is always an ongoing question in a society, is what are the compromises in order to get what we need from our government, and then what are the things that we need from our government? You know, there's never a fixed answer. Different societies answer that question in different ways.
Can you ask that question about justice and security? 'Cause in the 3 minutes that we have, I think it's an interesting flip.
Oh, yeah. I mean, here's a good way to look at this. But I mean, this is a whole year's conversation right now. But let me just tell you quickly. In the beginning of the "I Have a Dream" speech, Martin Luther King defines the American dream, and he says it's the riches of freedom and the security of justice. Why does justice make you feel secure?
It just gives you a confident sense of, like, I don't know.
You'll be taken care of with everything that's bad ever happens.
To be taken care of. What is it that why would justice make you feel secure? And we're talking about governments
Because
and
you're
security.
doing the right thing.
You're doing the right thing. What?
I just say innocent until proven guilty. The fact like that gives you justice to feel that
But,
you're innocent.
that's a really important point. that they can't just lock you up. I mean, this comes right from the Magna Carta, in the 13th century. That was the reason for the Magna Carta, is you can't just lock us up, you've got to have a reason. And we're innocent until you prove us guilty, right? That was one of the first things that was being demanded of government in terms of security, is the security of justice, of a law that protects us all equally. Okay? That's one of the great protections of a government, is that kind of security, that there will be justice equally for everyone. Turn that around. And instead of saying the security of justice, say the justice of security. You understand what I mean? In other words, if all we're thinking about is our security, and we base our justice around that, it means you're basing your sense of justice around your fear. Not your ideals about freedom and equality and stuff, but all you really care about is security. And then you make your laws on how can we be the most secure. Well, that's what happens then is you get torture, you get unwarranted surveillance, you get the end of habeas corpus, you get preemptive war, you get all these things where people in power say, oh, we needed to do this for your security. Not for your sense of justice, but for your security. We're making you safe. And when you start to base your legal system around ideas like, how can we be the most safe? It's suddenly open to enormous corruption and also denial of your basic rights. As you can see, we're losing, and have in the last 15 years, a lot of our rights.
It's a state of emergency.
Yeah, in the name of security. So, but that question, I mean, it's such a good one. What do we want? What is the obligation of government in relationship to security? Well, there isn't an answer, and it changes at times. In warfare, like Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. You have to have a reason to lock somebody up during the Civil War. Whoa, a lot of people were really upset. It's taken away a basic right and freedom. But isn't that the obligation of the government? But he said, well, we've got this other obligation to fight this war right now, and I think I can do it better if I don't have to worry about one of our essential laws.
There is pizza for sale today down by the main office.
That is
To
all
be continued.
the time that we have, you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. If you want to stick around and chat, feel free, okay?
Yeah,
Would, but any chance?
How's that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
That's, I know it.